Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. If you know the drill and kind of the content in terms of the order in which you know how to consume it, fast forward to about a minute 15, and we'll keep the ball moving. If you're seeing me for the first time, what's up, fellow human being? My name is Nick Kleitch. I am the creator of the Life with Nick YouTube channel and the host of the Life with Nick podcast. What I would encourage you to do, if you're intrigued at all by myself and what my channel is all about, if you could go over there and check out my introduction video. I break down everything in terms of what my channel's for, why I created it, the type of people that I want to kind of build a community around, and all of that good stuff. So if you go over there, check it out. If I'm for you and you want to be a part of the community, would love for you to join. If I'm not for you, completely understand. We're not all supposed to be for everyone in this world. Hopefully down the road our paths will connect. So do the due diligence of checking that out. That way you know if I'm for you or not. For those that do know what's going on, we're going to continue into our book read series of Emotional Agility by Susan David. So we just got done talking about how the process of getting hooked occurs. And before that, we talked about the awareness of this internal chatterbox, this unreliable narrator. And a little bit earlier, talked about emotional agility and getting introduced to that. So now to really encompass the building blocks of this book and to finally introduce kind of these traps that will tie this all together is the four most common emotional hooks. Now, the author does a great job of breaking these into four categories, and we'll explore each one. So the four most common hooks, and again, hooks is the process of listening to our internal and unreliable narrator, thought blending, and then the emotional punch into getting hooked. These four things are the environments and the causes of how we do that. So we have four of them. The first one is called thought blaming. The second is called monkey-mindedness. The third is called old outgrown ideas. And the fourth is called wrongheaded righteousness. Let's begin. Thought blaming is number one. So this is the interactions, plural, that we have every day where we are essentially placing judgment or an assumption on a thought that we have. So again, as that ocean comes in and comes out, we have these thoughts that come in, come out, and as we are surfing them, we're essentially saying that we are going to place judgment on a thought that has come through that we're paying attention to. Now, I'd like us to believe that there would be more good than bad, but as noted before, most of the time it is a negative in terms of us getting hooked. And so a couple examples of this is, let's say you're sitting in a meeting and you want to input something and you have an idea, but then you think to yourself shortly after the idea, I thought I would sound stupid, so I didn't speak up. Or let's say you're at a social gathering, a networking thing, what have you, and you're like, I want to go up to somebody, but if I go up to somebody, I'll probably fumble over my words and sound stupid. Notice how each one of those statements is us having a thought, which is going up to someone and introducing ourselves, speaking up in a meeting, but then we place a judgment or a self-defeating thought to the thought that we're having, hence thought blaming. Okay, so we thought blame ourselves in kind of two different categories, or at least this is my interpretation of this to kind of understand. So again, if we take the understanding that most of the time that we do this on the negative side of things, I kind of categorize it as we thought blame ourselves for either taking action on something that we want to do and failing or it not going well, or inaction and regretting not doing something even though we know we should have done that. So let's take just a little bit of time on both of these. So basically, this is kind of based on the outcome. So if you go into a meeting and you speak up and it goes over well, you're not going to thought blame yourself because it was a success, right? So this is when you go in and you share that and you unfortunately fail. Then it's like, gosh, I knew I shouldn't have said anything, or gosh, I wish I would have prepared more. You're now blaming the thoughts for the action that you took and saying, we should have done this, this, or this. In reverse, let's say you didn't speak up or you didn't say hi, and then later on you figured out that you should have done that, you're going to self-defeat yourself because you did not take action. So hopefully you're kind of picking up what I'm putting down here. When we start thought blaming, we're not allowing the stimulus between our response and assuming the negative. And we do this because we're not really sure and we have our own interpretation of the world. And so we may think something went well or negatively when in reality we have no idea if it did or not, or we haven't had that full contextualized result of saying, okay, if it wasn't 100% a slam dunk, it probably was a failure or whatnot. So just to kind of conclude this point on thought blaming, thoughts in isolation do not cause behavior, right? Remember the waves of thoughts. So thoughts are just coming through as they come through. We can cause our own behavior by the response to the thoughts with the emotions. This is the thought blaming part of it. And again, we're not great at choosing what waves to ride from our former video, right? So this is just simply breaking down the fact that thoughts are thoughts. Our behavior to thoughts is what kind of gets us in trouble a little bit. Okay, so that was the first one. Monkey-Mindedness is the second one. And this one is a little bit more complex, and this concept does have a couple layers to it. So layer one, this monkey-mindedness comes from a concept from meditation, and essentially it's how our mind leaps from one thing to another thing. So monkey swinging from tree to tree, we're not just staying on one thought. Let's say we're on a thought, then we're on another thought, then we're on another thought, then we're on another thought. Layer two is that from these kind of jumping back and forth points, if things don't go well within a certain interaction, we begin to create mock situations based on what we think kind of occurred when we were going through that experience. So here's a good example. Let's say you have an argument with your spouse before you leave for work. And on the way to work, you're riding to work and you begin playing out some of these emotional outcomes that you thought you were right, but they said you were wrong, or you wish you would have delivered the message in a different way, or what have you, right? So now you begin to take being hooked, because again, these are a trap for being hooked. So you're in this hook and you begin to create all these mock situations of coulda, shoulda, woulda, negative outcomes, all this stuff. So the reason this is a hook and a trap is because most of the time we are spending so much time entertaining all of these mock situations, right? And at the end of the day, or at the end of the time within these situations, we're totally exhausted by things that may or may not even happen or did happen. So really this occurs when we think about worst case situations, but also it's a pull from the past or thinking about the future. It's not the present reality, right? We do a very bad job as humans understanding what truly took place because we're all in our own interpretations. So again, you have the argument. Maybe your spouse didn't even think it was an argument. It was a miscommunication. And now you've just spent 30 minutes driving to work festering on what isn't even reality. Okay, that's why this is really tough and it is a trap. As much as thought blaming, which is probably more common or most common, creating these fake situations or these unrealistic situations is something where we can lose just a ton of time on. Okay, before we dive into the third one, I just want to kind of drill in points here. So again, we have the waves coming in, we have the waves coming out. We're choosing which thoughts we want to entertain, and we have kind of these four traps that we fall into. One is thought blaming, and two is monkey-mindedness. The third is old outgrown ideas. This one is one of the bigger and more influential concepts in the book itself. So I just want to take a little bit of time here. So really what this is as we are going through the process of living our life, we'll have good experiences that serve us well and bad experiences that don't serve us well. When we're growing up, we never really are shared with or told that we will create narratives in our life about ourselves. This could be as simple as, I'm funny, but I'm short and people don't like short people. Or I got made fun of because I made a comment about this or that, and now people, I have a nickname in high school of, whatever it is. And so we carry those things on in our lives, and they no longer serve us at a certain point. So a nickname or someone that poked fun at us in high school, and we get to 40s, 50s, and 60s, we can still believe the narrative of the negative outcomes that happen. And so the reason why this is such a hook is because when present reality things occur, that can bring us back into these old narratives. And so this one's, again, kind of a huge concept to really compartmentalize like in this video. So I'm just going to try to hammer on an idea, an example to kind of play it out, but then we'll talk about maybe how to like overcome that a little bit. So in the book, they have kind of an intense situation here, but I think it is one part of the spectrum that we could maybe pull from. So there was a gentleman that as a child was mocked and beaten and abused by his father. And to protect himself, he learned to show basically no emotions, no vulnerabilities, because his father would use that as a means of manipulation. Okay, so he had to do that and detach from his feelings to protect his inner child during those experiences of his life. Now, fast forward to, him being, let's say, 42. It wasn't fair that he had this abusive father, right? But this narrative is how he handles these situations. And so he's going into the world now, and he's trying to fall in love and find a partner, have friends, have colleagues, all this stuff. But when things come up in his world that are triggers to some of these things, he immediately goes back into that old narrative of, I'm just not going to I'm going to have no emotions because that's how I protected myself at one point, right? So the old thing that helped him no longer helps him and prevents him from living a rich life. And so we have to be really mindful of understanding all the narratives that we think about ourselves, but then B, writing new stories for the lives that we want to live in the future. And so this one, like I said, is a very huge concept and there's a lot going on, but you can see how when we have a collection of these narratives, how we can be so intensely hooked into some of these things as they play out with our emotions and as we've been talking. So just the final point there from the book that I think is a good point to conclude there. So this is where emotional agility can come into play. We can learn to adapt new ideas about ourselves and new narratives about ourselves and release these old stories that are no longer serving us. So then that way we can take advantage of future opportunities and change our lives for the better. Okay, now this doesn't happen overnight, obviously, but if we continue to consume and study this emotional agility as a skill, over time, we can become more emotionally agile to not have some of that stuff affect us into getting hooked into old things that don't even serve us anymore. Excellent. So the last one is wrongheaded righteousness. Okay? So in so many areas of life, we hang on too long to the idea of justice in the sense of being right or having justice to us having the right answer. So said it another way, like we just have to be right in no matter the outcome. And think about this in real life in the sense of things that don't happen well for us. We can spend so much time worrying about how we get it to where we were right and they were wrong. And the worst part about this is that if we were wrong, now we're just trying to say we're right even though we're wrong, and we can't just accept I was wrong, forgive myself, forgive others, move on in life, right? So this again is a hook and a way to get hooked, an environment to get hooked in the sense that we always need to be right. Okay? So this need for rightness can steal years away from your life if and when you let it persist. So you can literally live moments over in your mind that happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, and you can still be brooding on this whole thing of, oh, like back then, like it just bothers me so much to this day that they didn't get that right. And it's like, how much of life is that stealing away from you just because you want to be right instead of, regardless of the outcome, even if I was right or wrong, let's just move on in life, right? Let's come to peace and to terms with some of these things and move on. Now, some things I get, right? If they're major, major situations, you really wish you could go back and right the ship. But that's just not how life works, right? And so the more that we understand that it's okay to be wrong and not try so hard to be right, even if we are wrong, that can help us become more emotionally agile to just moving on in life and being able to live a more rich life. So just to kind of give the other side of the spectrum a little bit of attention here. So being right is great. Like it feels really good to be right, and it feels good to have knowledge so that way you're not wrong a lot of the time. especially in tense moments or competition. Like it feels really good to win. It feels really good to be right, XYZ. But it can be so easily taken too far when we're trapped or we're overly competitive to the point where like winning and being right is our only motivation. Okay. We all know people like this where it's like they will go to all ends of the earth to be overly competitive just to win, or they go all ends of the earth to be right even though they know that they're wrong. Every day, like we're interacting with people, and we might even be these people, unfortunately, where being right and living our lives like is a must have. And I would say, based on this trap, that sometimes we are right and sometimes we are wrong. And it's okay to be wrong because we're all imperfect beings. So if you feel that there are certain situations where you've mishandled it or they've mishandled it and you're bothered by that, again, learning these skills of emotional agility and understanding the awareness of these traps can help you say, okay, even though it didn't happen how I wanted it to happen, I'm going to actively choose to rewrite a new narrative, to rewrite a new script to the point where I can just move on and go do other things in life. And then I think to switch gears completely on that, we can get to the point where we're so consumed or hate or want to destroy someone or a situation just to be right, right? So that's when, unfortunately, this like really permeates through a team. If you're a leader or a manager, like this need to always be right or never be wrong can really cause dysfunction and disrupt a lot of trust. And again, it's all predicated on the motivation of just being right. Now, again, another thing with this is adding our ego into this if we're wrong. So if you're someone that grew up that you had to always be right or you had to always win, totally understandable. Most of the time that does play out. However, you can kind of take a hit where you got to just kind of set the ego aside and say, you know what, I misunderstood it, or I'm wrong, or all of the combination of these things, right? We have just a limited time on this earth. So you have to understand kind of the gravity of the situation to say, you know what, I'm not going to let that kind of give life and just kind of move on so I can go do other things. Yeah, so we're all humans. Sometimes we can be right, sometimes we can wrong. But there are people out there, and just kind of understand that there are people out there that they'll hold on to a grudge for the entirety of their life. You know, they'll give power to someone that wronged them for the entire duration of their life. And it's just unfortunate to see sometimes because, again, the more we give that power away to them, the more they're still impacting us and they're still winning. Even though we may know that they're right, they're still winning because we're giving them power. That's the whole kind of essence of this, and why we're studying this emotional agility is because we want to just say, hey, we're going to come to terms with the fact that we're going to move on. The outcome wasn't what we wanted, but we're going to go live and create abundance in our life in other ways. Let's see here. Sorry, I kind of lost my footing a little bit. Okay, so just to finish this last one on a strong note here. So we must learn to accept that things happen outside of our control, right? And we are wrong. We move forward. We come to peace with the outcome. Otherwise, again, we can like burn bridges and zap all of our useful creative energy just trying to go back in the past to create, the rightness in our mind for what happened, 5, 10, 15 years ago. So there's a passage from the book that summarizes this topic of conversation really well. So you can never step into the same river twice, for you're different and the river is different. That's kind of the metaphor they're looking for here. So meaning the world is ever changing, and with that it is presenting new opportunities and new situations. And to make the most out of these new opportunities and situations, we got to stay out of the way of just trying to be right for the sake of being right. To make the most out of these new opportunities, we must continually kind of break away from these old categories and formulate new ones. And this is where that emotional agility comes in. We can come into our world from a fresh perspective to say, I want to be right, I want to win, and that is very healthy and very good. But if it doesn't happen like we want it to happen, we have to work on the ability to separate from that outcome, kind of understand and process everything and say, okay, didn't happen how it was supposed to happen. What happened did happen. I'm going to learn from it, grow from it, and then I'm going to move on. So just as we're rounding out this coaching concept of the 4 most common hooks, things change and we need flexibility to ensure that we change as well. Emotional agility means being aware and accepting all your emotions and learning from even the most difficult ones. It also means getting beyond the conditioned or program of our narratives and our emotional responses to certain people and situations that bring us into the worst versions of ourselves. Because remember, when we're hyperactive on emotions, we're not the best version of ourselves because we're riding these emotions and leading us to a place of potentially a lot of harm. When we can clearly read present circumstances as they are, respond appropriately as we develop the skills of emotional agility, we can then align with our deepest values to live a more enriched life. Okay, so these were the 4 most common hooks that we need to be aware of, and just to bundle all these big 3 coaching concepts together. So we now have an understanding of our unreliable narrator. We possess it, everyone possesses it, and we're always going to have to deal with it. So we have to be present with that. Next, we have covered the process of being hooked and what that process means to be able to not only be aware of it, but to learn how to detach from being hooked. And then lastly, we now have these 4 environments that we know that lead us to being hooked. And they are, again, thought blaming, monkey-mindedness, old stories and narratives that no longer serve us, and this wrong-headed righteousness. So as we wrap up these coaching concepts, I would encourage you to go back and really process all of these together, because there's a lot coming at you, and also for just a better understanding to get better results. And furthermore, if this is the first time you're hearing about this stuff, it's very powerful in how these concepts can positively and negatively affect your life. So if this is the first time, take some time to go either through the book or rewatch this so you really have an understanding of how this all comes together. And then with that, you can truly begin to develop the skills of emotional agility, again, to get more of the outcomes and key in and win on the opportunities that will come in the future. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this. We're going to continue to keep the ball rolling. But I appreciate you so much for entertaining today's coaching concept, which is the 4 most common hooks out there. Thanks.